here we are, we're grooving, we're playing bass, and I am hoping that you're here to groove and play bass as well. So today's lesson is all about kind of making that transition from guitar to bass and a couple of the fatal mistakes that guitar players make when they pick up this instrument from a technical standpoint. Now, if you want to kind of explore this concept and come over to the low end, I have a full course on my website. It's called The Guitarist's Guide to Bass, and it's perfectly designed to bring you, a guitar player, over to bass world. And it's also a great course for bass players as well. It goes over basic technique, gear, basic blues, funk, rock grooves, all kinds of stuff. I think it's a really cool course, so you can head over to ryanmedora.com and check that out there. But today we're just going to get started and talk a little bit about the technique that habitually as a guitar player you might bring to this instrument, or as a bass player you just want to be mindful of if you're getting started here. So we're going to kind of break this down into what we can think about with our fretting hand as well as then our plucking hand. So let's kind of start over here and talk about the things that, are important as we pick up a bass. So the first thing I've noticed is that most people that come from guitar kind of take a sideways approach to the way their hand is on the fretboard. Now this really comes from doing cowboy chords like open G, C, D, things like that, where we're used to holding down multiple strings on the same fret. If you think about a G chord, you maybe hold down multiple strings on the 3rd fret. So your hand has to be kind of sideways in order to do that, in order to have that position. Now, the issue is when we come to bass, we don't want to have a sideways approach to the fretboard. We want to have a really on top of the fretboard approach. So in order to do that, what it comes down to is knowing where our thumb position is, knowing where our wrist is, and keeping our fingers over the fretboard as much as we possibly can. So when we're playing guitar, you might kind of be sideways, you might do some solo-y things and be up here, your pinky goes into no man's land. We want to keep our pinky present, and a great way to do that is really to work on our 4-fret span. So to do so, I'm going to just do a basic chromatic exercise where I'm going to keep a couple things in mind. One, I'm going to keep my thumb on the back of the fretboard, but I'm not going to grasp it. I'm not going to grip it too hard. I'm going to just use it as a way to steady my positioning. 2, I'm going to try to keep my fingers as close to the fretboard and as close to the strings as I can. That'll help with muting and timing. And then 3, I'm going to make sure that I am, hitting right behind the fret. We want to have really good technique. We don't want to be in the middle of the fret or closer to the one behind it. We want to be right behind the fret. So I'm going to start just by going 1 finger per fret, 4-fret span. And you can see that as I do that, my hand is really right over the fretboard. My fingers are there. I'm not over to the side. And you can kind of see my wrist position too. If I'm sideways, my wrist is going to be out. My elbow is going to be out. If I bring my wrist in and my elbow in, my hand is going to be a lot straighter against the fretboard. So I'm going to go just straight across. And that's just a basic exercise that you can do to get comfortable with that 4-fret span. So again, if you're from guitar land and you're coming over to the bass world, we really want to make sure that we prioritize using all of our fingers. A lot of people are like, I don't like to use my pinky that much. And frankly, you got to use the pinky. It's got to be at this party, because otherwise we might get into bad habits and develop some weird positioning for shapes. Like some people will kind of do this octave thing with their index and their ring finger, and that's just a really awkward sideways shape. It's a lot easier if you use your index and your pinky to play an octave, and you can kind of see how much more comfortable that looks on the instrument as well. So that's the major egregious error of coming from guitar to bass, is not using all 4 fingers and having a really good 4-fret span. So make sure you are aware of that. Now, let's head over to this side. Let's talk a little bit about our plucking hand. So as we come over to this side of the musical register, the low end, you might be really comfortable playing with a pick on guitar and you want to bring that to bass world. That's cool. I am pro pick. If you want to play with a pick, that's great. Many bass players have and will continue to do so. If you want to, though, and you want to get into the traditional kind of finger style element of bass playing, what we want to do is alternate between our index and our middle fingers. And there are a few things we want to keep in mind. One is we want to kind of find a place for our thumb to live. Sometimes it's the E string, sometimes it's the pickup, sometimes people will float back and forth, and that's okay, but we do want to have kind of like a place for our thumb to live, for it to like anchor the rest of our hand. So that's rule number one. Rule number two is we want to make sure we have a slight bend in our fingers, and we want to use that fleshy part of our fingertip. So we want to have a little bit of a curve in our hand and be able to kind of go back and forth, alternating between our index and middle finger. So for instance, if we just play the note C, we can see that I can alternate and go back and forth. One interesting thing is a lot of people refer to this hand as our plucking hand, and I don't love that word. I think that when we say that we're plucking, it kind of implies that we're doing like an upward motion, like we're physically plucking up. That's not really the case. Instead, I like to use the term gliding, where we want to glide over the string and then come to rest on the string behind it. So if we play that C, we might use our index finger, glide over the A string, where we're fretting the C with our right hand, or our left hand, and then we come to rest on the E string below it. And so we glide and rest. And what that does is it helps with muting. It means that our E string won't ring out and won't have any weird sounds. And it'll also help us have a much clearer tone for the note that we are actually playing with this hand. So you can see everything that I do is a glide to rest, glide to rest. And we're not really resting for long, we're just kind of landing there. So glide and land and rest on the string behind it. The next thing I'm going to think about is as I move across the strings, what we want to make sure we do is we use our thumb as a pivot point. So our thumb is going to kind of like live like this so we can go back and forth. What we don't want to do is keep our thumb steady and extend our fingers, because when we do that, we're no longer able to use the fleshy part of our fingertip to hit the string. And it also can create pain or stress in our hand. We don't want to have that hyperextension there. So if we do that, we know that we're keeping our thumb too tightly up here, and we're not using our wrist enough to bring ourselves over the fretboard or over the strings. So as we go across, I'm just going to kind of play across the 3rd fret. You can see that as I've gotten to my G string, my wrist is now over the strings and over where like the fretboard would be a little bit more. So I'm kind of making that motion using that pivot with my thumb. Starting down here, keeping a nice bend in my fingers, and then doing that same thing on the way back. I'm not extending, I'm letting my thumb act as that pivot point, and that's a really important thing for your bass journey, just getting comfortable with the technique of fingerstyle playing. So again, there's a lot to think about as you're making this transition over to bass world, or if you're just picking up the instrument for the first time, and there's a lot of goodness that can happen by just like focusing on technique for a little bit. So those are the big things that, especially if you're coming from guitar to bass, you want to be mindful of as you pick up this new technique of, having a really solid 4-fret span with your fretting hand and going with the alternating index and middle and having that nice kind of like thumb pivot with your right hand or your plucking hand. So if you dug this lesson, head over to ryanmedora.com, check out the Guitarist Guide to Bass, and you can also support my Patreon, and I really love having everybody's support there. There's tab and notation for all my videos on this channel there, and it's just great to have that community. So thank you for being here. Happy practicing, everybody, and keep it groovy.